Hi everyone, before we get started, I'd like to point you over to christianjohnsondrums.com for a free PDF download of every exercise I play in this video. You'll also notice that I've done full text transcriptions of this lesson as well as all my previous lessons so that you can follow along at your own pace. The link for this lesson is in the description below. Let's begin. Hey everyone, this is Christian and welcome back to the Rhythm and Reading series. This video is about syncopation and in particular 8th note syncopation. There is a second video about 16th note syncopation. So I started this video with a little bit of me playing on the drum set. Now let's take a look at the sheet music for that. You'll notice that it's pretty straightforward, it's just 8th notes and quarter notes. So what makes this sheet music special? Why does it sound different? Well, the answer lies in a concept called syncopation. Now, it's a concept because really it has to do with the feel and the sound of the music. And there is a particular way to notate it so that musicians know that they are playing syncopated rhythms. So let's get a little bit more in-depth. Let's read an official definition of syncopation. Now, I found this one online, and it actually is, because it's a conceptual thing, it has more to do with feeling and sound, it is kind of hard to describe. But I've thought that this person did a great job. So this is Miles Hoffman, who is a violinist and the founder of the American Chamber Players. And this is what Miles had to say. Syncopation is the placement of rhythmic stresses or accents where they wouldn't normally occur. Let's let that marinate. He goes on to say, in traditional Western music, the first beat of a bar, the downbeat, is the strongest, but syncopation shifts the emphasis to weaker beats or to subdivisions of beats. So without hearing syncopation and understanding what the actual sound and this change in the flow feels like, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So let's talk a little bit about the facts that Hoffman has put into this. First, in Western music, there's a normal or traditional way that music pulses and flows. That's true, and we're going to get into that. 2, syncopation changes that feel. And that's what this video is about. We'll look into that next. The way that syncopation does this is by emphasizing weak beats within the measure by stressing and or accenting them. Now, when he says stressing, what I believe he's talking about is the introduction of more duration. We play the note for a longer time. That makes it feel like it's a little bit more important. That's the emphasis. The other way to do that is by accenting it, by playing it louder. And of course, that makes that note stand out as well. It makes it more important. And the whole idea is that we want weak beats to sound like strong beats. And that's what perks our ear. So next, we're going to look at the traditional pulse and flow of Western music because it's important to understand where we're coming from. And then we'll look at how syncopation changes that. And finally, we'll wrap up with some rhythmic notation. We'll look into the rhythms, how it's written so that you as a player know that you're playing a syncopated rhythm when you see it. I put together this animation to help explain how beats are normally emphasized in our music. I have 16 glasses on a table, representing all of the 16th notes in a measure of 4/4 time. I'm going to add a coin to each glass representing where we would normally play whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, 8th notes, and 16th notes. We'll start with the whole note, which can only be placed in beat 1 of this measure because it takes up all 4 beats. Next, I'll add coins for the half notes. There's a coin on beat 1 and on beat 3 because we can have 2 half notes in the measure. There are 4 quarter notes in a measure of 4/4, so I'll add a coin to each of the numbered glasses. Those quarter notes can be subdivided into 8th notes, so I'll add a coin to each glass that represents where we can play an 8th note. I'll add another coin to all the numbered glasses, but then I'll also add a coin to each glass labeled AND. Finally, I need to add coins for the 16th notes. Since there are 16 16th notes in a measure of 4/4, I'll need to add a coin to every glass on the table. When I remove the glasses and we look at how many coins we have in each column, we end up with a chart of how strong each beat and subdivision normally is within a measure. I can actually draw a line through the tops of each column and show you where the strong and weak beats land. Beat 1 is the downbeat of the bar, and it's called that because it's the strongest. This chart is evidence proving why it's so strong. It gets a coin every single time. Beat 3 is the next strongest beat, and I like to think of it like a secondary strong point in the measure. It's not as strong as beat 1, but it's very grounding to the overall feel of the music. Beats 2 and beats 4 are next in strength. Not quite as strong as beat 1 or 3, but strong enough to drive the pulse of the music forward. After that, the 8th note upbeats come next in strength, with the 16th note upbeats being the weakest point of the measure. This translates directly to how some drum set beats are played, so I'm going to give a few examples so you can hear how this works. Starting with the downbeat, I'll add a kick drum because it's the biggest drum and adds low end to the groove. Then I'll add another kick to beat 3, which is our secondary strong point. Just the nature of the drum adds enough emphasis to this beat. For beats 2 and 4, I'll play a snare drum. And for you drum set players out there, you'll start to see the pattern developing. The snare drum adds enough emphasis to drive the groove, but it's not as heavy and deep as the bass drum. Our hi-hat will drive the 8th notes. You'll notice that by themselves on the upbeats, they're thin and metallic sounding. But on the beats, they combine with the kick and snare to create more emphasis. Finally, you'll notice I didn't play a hi-hat with beat 1, and that's because it would only be as strong as beat 3 if I did that. It needs to be stronger. So instead, I'll play a crash cymbal. It's explosive and it has a lot of sustain. Now I'll play that groove on the drums so you can hear the different strength levels. I'm going to play 2 measure phrases. The crash will only be on beat 1 of the first measure. That way I'm not crashing over and over again. Hopefully you were able to hear how the basic rock beat outlined the strong and weak beats of the measure. But what happens if I move that strong downbeat to another part of the measure? Let's say I want to move the emphasis to the and of beat 4. To accomplish that sound, I'll need to change the instruments that I'm playing on the upbeat. So I'll move the kick and crash to the upbeat of beat 4. But one of the characteristics of a syncopated rhythm is that it also adds length or duration to the weak beat. So since I need to add length, I have to de-emphasize beat 1. That's why it becomes a hi-hat with no kick drum. Let's say we'd like to try a rhythm where the emphasis is on the and of 1. We can do that by playing a kick and crash there, but to be truly syncopated, we also have to account for the extra duration it needs. That means pushing back the snare drum and hi-hat combo from beat 2 to the and of 2. So hopefully now you have an idea of what it sounds like to take a typically weak beat, like an 8th note upbeat, and to give it an emphasis like a strong beat, kind of like our downbeat. Now the examples that I played are not the only ways that you can play syncopation, but hopefully it gave you enough contrast to hear the difference. We have a kick drum and a crash cymbal playing typically where we don't have that sort of emphasis. It really changes the flow of the music. Now, syncopation is written and notated in a very specific way, and that's so that the player knows, okay, I need to give this rhythm a different sort of emphasis. So let's start by looking at the opening exercise again. You'll notice that there are quarter notes in places we don't usually expect to find them. Not all of them are on the beats. Some of them are on the upbeats. Now let's take a closer look at how that works. Here we're in 2/4 time, which means we have 2 beats in a measure and the quarter note gets the beat. The top line is the played rhythm and the bottom line is there to give you a reference for where the quarter note beat is. If you remember back to the previous lessons on eighth notes, you learned that a quarter note can be subdivided into 2 equal eighth notes. You may also recall that the beam that groups the eighths is there to help you see the beat clearly. Really, you could also just write this measure as 4 eighth notes. It sounds the same. And one of the hard, fast rules about rhythm notation is that the individual note durations absolutely must add up to match the time signature. You can use any combination of notes as long as this is true. So with that in mind, we can take these 2 middle eighth notes and replace them with a single quarter note. When you add up all the durations, the measure still works, but now it's written in this very specific way. So let's take a closer look at this rhythm. In the first measure, we have an example of how the syncopated rhythm is written. This is how you will see it in music. You'll notice that there's a quarter note on the and of 1. It's on an upbeat, not a downbeat. The second measure shows you how it sounds. This is very important because it shows you that the quarter note should be held out for its full duration. That is a key characteristic of syncopation. The weak note becomes emphasized by adding duration. If you go back to the lesson on ties and dots, you'll remember that tied notes combine their durations. You don't play the second note, you keep holding on to the first note through the duration of the second. When you play an instrument like a trumpet, you would hold the note out for a full quarter note length. The length of the note is what gives it the initial emphasis. When we play this on a drum set or an instrument without sustain, you can create this feeling by playing a cymbal crash or a bass drum or an accent if you're playing on a single drum. The last measure shows you how to count this. You play the 1, you play the and, you don't play on beat 2, but you play again on the and of 2. Now let's go back to that original eighth note syncopation exercise, and I'll play the whole thing for you on the snare drum. Okay, so now we're going to play that same exercise behind the drum set. Now here's how I came up with my interpretation. Whenever I saw an eighth note, I played a snare drum. I thought it provided a nice, crisp, short attack and a pop that lasted an eighth note. In my mind, that's an eighth note. Then I played crashes and kick drums on all the quarter notes. Again, I wanted length and emphasis. So the result is the exercise you saw at the beginning, and now here's the full thing. And hopefully you really can hear the idea, the concept, the sound of syncopation in this exercise. Okay, so that is 8-note syncopation. And if you want to practice more rhythms just like those, I have 2 books that you can check out. The first up is Progressive Steps to Syncopation for the Modern Drummer. This is kind of like the Bible of syncopation, but it's actually very similar to Joel Rothman's Teaching Rhythm. Both books teach you standard duple rhythms in the traditional Western format and pulse, right? Halfway through the book, and then somewhere around page 30 in this book and 60 something in this book, they get into syncopation, and they're both excellent. They cover the same concept. So check out either one of those will work for you. Now, if you've liked this video, please like, subscribe, ring the bell. The next one is on 16th note syncopation, which I love. It's just a little bit more intricate, sounds real funky and fun. Don't forget, you could also get the PDF for this lesson, my other lessons, as well as full text transcriptions at christianjohnsondrums.com. I'll see you next time.